I hope you all enjoyed your evenings yesterday in Chengdu and experienced some of what this fantastic city has to offer. We heard from some great speakers yesterday and some very interesting panel discussions, beginning with our keynote speaker, Director of Civil Aviation for South Africa, Ms. Poppy Koza, to our first session, where we heard from global RPAS operators and the unique challenges they experience in moving beyond the paradigm of manned aviation in the transition from accommodation to integration. Then we heard from representatives from air navigation service providers concerning their plans for integration and the risks that need to be minimized in order to seamlessly integrate RPA into the existing ATM system. In our afternoon sessions, we invited representatives from state civil aviation authorities to share their perspectives developing the performance-based regulatory environment that is necessary to enable RPAS operations. After the coffee break, our speakers provided a fascinating showcase of emerging technologies, their potential capabilities, and the gaps or shortcomings as we look for interoperable solutions. On this third and final day of RPAS 3, we will take a look at how the transition of RPAS operations from accommodation to integration is impacting other stakeholders, how civil-military cooperation can enhance safety along this journey, as well as a special look at some of the exciting RPAS-related activities that are currently underway in our host country, China. But before we get to our sessions, we have another exciting keynote speaker for you today. Mr. Logan Jones is Senior Director at HorizonX and Next, the Boeing company's venture capital and innovation arms, focused on investing in companies developing cutting-edge aerospace technologies such as on-demand cargo drones, urban air taxis, and even hypersonic airliners. Prior to assuming these roles, Mr. Jones held positions of increasing responsibility within the Boeing company in corporate strategy and business development, with a focus on new ventures and emerging business opportunities. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Logan Jones to the podium.
Thank you for the kind words, Phil. Good morning, ni hao. Madam Secretary, distinguished guests, and industry friends, on behalf of the Boeing Company, thank you. Thank you for establishing this forum for airspace regulators and industry partners to get together to collaborate. Thank you for the coordination and hard work involved in putting together a seamless event like this and one that's high value. Thank you, too, for the time away from your families and no doubt busy demands back at home to be here together. Most of all, thank you for your efforts to partner across borders and boundaries, to be the thought leaders and force behind setting the direction for the future global standards for aviation, and for continuing the mission of harmonizing standards and promoting aviation safety across the globe. On behalf of the Boeing Company, it's an honor to be invited to share some thoughts about the future of flight, the key trends motivating us to innovate, and how autonomous systems and RPAS will enhance safety and be used as a key tool to increase the accessibility of aviation and to better connect people and improve lives. ICAO plays an important role in paving the road for the development of complementary rules and performance-based standards for RPAS worldwide, and thereby prevent unnecessary burdens for industry and, by extension, for regulators. Boeing is committed to supporting ICAO through our work on various technical committees, including the RPAS panel, and we strive to speak with one industry voice through ICC-AIA. Through support of these related works, we can assure that the rules and standards developed by the RPAS panel are consistent with airspace management, providing a means for integrated, non-segregated airspace and aerodomes. We welcome the progress made by the RPAS panel to update the RPAS manual, and we see the development of the first SARPs on RPAS as a milestone to facilitate safe, secure, and efficient integration of remotely piloted aircraft and eventually of autonomous systems into non-segregated airspace and aerodromes. The overarching guidance is intended to maintain the existing level of safety with operations that allow for the coexistence of RPAS and manned aviation. Boeing appreciates ICAO's enduring commitment to advancing the global aviation ecosystem and industry needs by ensuring regulators have the right capabilities and experts to make well-informed decisions. The work of this body, and indeed the group assembled here today, is more important than ever. As we look at the world, we see impactful trends suggesting that the need for harmonization and vision is greater now than ever before. In fact, it may be one of the key enablers to progress. And the benefits from connecting the world and opening new opportunities that come from more accessible aviation makes the hard work ahead worthwhile. While these trends are likely familiar in groups and forums like this, I'm going to share just two: urbanization and the growth of the middle class. These will certainly affect the work of ICAO, global regulators, and industry partners, and will push us to write rules that safely allow for the integration and use of RPAS and autonomous aircraft across the globe. First, let's start with urbanization. The world is rapidly urbanizing, putting greater demands on our already fragile and expensive infrastructure. According to the United Nations, 55% of the global population today lives in cities, and the trend is expected to continue and accelerate. By 2045, the number of people living in cities will increase 1.5 times to 6 billion, adding 2 billion more urban residents. And PwC estimates that 90% of this urban population growth will take place in places like Africa and Asian countries, which are already constrained by infrastructure challenges today. And just to keep up with the growth, $78 trillion in global infrastructure investment will be needed in the next 10 years alone. Meanwhile, the expectations people have about livability with cities is changing. It's also because cities are a rich target to make progress, since they consume 75% of the world's natural resources and account for about 80% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Put another way, we are experiencing a mass migration into cities and at the same time trying to build the infrastructure just to keep up, while at the same time people are demanding more accessibility and better livability. We've got to change. This is sparking transformations to travel and transportation itself, in cities and for how those cities connect to the world beyond. All means of transportation are becoming more automated and connected, improving efficiency and safety. Those transformations are foundational to sustain global growth, and much like transportation on the ground, things are changing in the air too. The growth of flights will move away from hubs to regional and even urban environments. This is pushing those of us in this room to grapple with the balance of legacy and innovation. Deeper levels of automation and connectedness can be used to improve efficiency and safety in the air, eventually moving us away from accommodation to integration. Now for the rise of the middle class. According to the Brookings Institution, the global middle class is projected to grow from 3.2 billion people to nearly 5 billion by 2030, with most of the growth coming from emerging markets. In fact, 88% of the next billion entrants into the middle class will be from right here in Asia, a place that's already struggling to keep up with the new demands and working to alleviate capacity constraints that exist for current infrastructure like airspace, roads, and rail. With increasing fortunes comes increasing expectations. As the middle class grows, so too does the value people put on time, driving the expectation that flight will move closer to home. How people are able to use their new middle class wealth is changing too. New business models are making transportation more accessible to the masses. The sharing economy is providing a means for the middle class to buy only the portion of expensive assets that they use, like cars, motorcycles, bikes, even planes, increasing accessibility to many. This will expand in the future to autonomous flying taxis and even new ways to deliver cargo between 2 points. Focusing on what that means to our industry, well, currently, about 80% of the world population has yet to step foot on an airplane. Meanwhile, this potential is coming at a time when we forecast that the world will already need somewhere between 637,000 and 790,000 new pilots over the next 20 years, and that's under existing use models and forecasts. Imagine what that shortfall will grow to as technologies like electric propulsion and advanced manufacturing drives ownership and operating costs down to make flight competitive to other forms of travel. Growth in regional aviation and urban flight is truly on the horizon. We must find the balance between legacy and innovation to increase the ability for this growing class of people to connect with and engage with the world economy. And we strongly believe that aviation will play a major role in this transformation. We think that harmonized and complementary standards are an enabler, not a barrier, to allow for the adoption of new technology and will help us rise to the opportunity to truly change the world. Exciting new areas of technology like autonomy, enhanced connectivity, electric propulsion, advanced manufacturing, and many more are maturing and being applied to open constraints across all areas of the aerospace and aviation market, while continuing to maintain the standards and safety that we all demand. The fact is that today, we as an industry are presented with a once-in-a-lifetime challenge and opportunity. How will we evolve and adapt the global standards that have delivered our industry over 100,000 daily flights while still promoting, in fact, improving the high bar of safety that's paramount to sustained growth? To give you insights into how we're approaching it at Boeing, we're working towards introducing a responsible new mobility ecosystem beyond vehicles alone. Through our technology development internally and investments externally, as well as our work with industry partners and regulators, we are uniting key enablers and stakeholders to shape the ecosystem in a way that prioritizes safety. Autonomy is integral to the future of air mobility. It will make travel safer, more reliable, and more accessible. We are building technology that will enable both fully autonomous vehicle operations as well as intelligent systems that will assist pilots during routine operations. Autonomous cargo and passenger air vehicle prototypes and new approaches to UTM are being built and tested right now. It was the famed author and futurist Arthur C. Clarke that said, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." And while we want the usability and utility of these systems to indeed carry the appearance of magic, we know it's not. We know that the introduction of these new technologies won't all happen at once. Proven technologies will be phased in only after they've gone through a robust development process that includes rigorous, real-world testing and operations, just like regulators and customers expect of us today. And through our venture fund and HorizonX, we are investing in and engaging with the goal of stimulating new players in the ecosystem that will help us accelerate a future where autonomous and piloted air vehicles can safely coexist. Yet, we at Boeing believe that there is no single answer to the question of how, and it requires more than a single voice to illuminate the path ahead. That's why ICAO's mission as a consensus-driven global institution is as critical now as ever before. That's why listening to the voices of each of the member states with their diversity of thought and needs is critical to building out a safe, efficient, secure, economically sustainable, and environmentally responsible civil aviation sector. Boeing will continue to support this body, its mission, and with the spirit of innovation and partnership that has served our company well over the past 102 years, we will work with you, our industry partners, to help deliver the value and safety remotely piloted aircraft systems and autonomous aircraft promise. In the words of our founder, let's build something better. We look forward to transforming flight together. Thank you.
Thank you, Logan. I think all of us will be following your work at HorizonX and Next as you continue to help shape the future of unmanned aviation and make progress for everyone on the journey from accommodation to integration. And that's a terrific segue to our first session of the day, which examines the disruptive impact that RPAS operations may be having on airspace users and other stakeholders. From air traffic controllers to airline pilots, airports, and airlines. To take us through this next session, I'm happy to invite back Ms. Leslie Cary to moderate this session.
All right, very good. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good evening yesterday, got lots of sleep, and are ready for a lot more. We already just heard now about much of the work that has to be done going forward. After all, we have all these new voices, all this new activity. We have the population shifts coming ever more rapidly into cities, the congestions to deal with, and the magic. And an awful lot of this really is based on what appears to be magic, or at least science fiction. But it's the reality, it's the new reality, and we are working very hard to make it all happen. So as part of that, this morning we will hear an additional set of voices. We've been hearing from regulators and air navigation service providers yesterday. So today we'll hear more from the controllers, the pilots, the airport operators, and the airlines on how they are looking at all of these new entrants coming into their nice, predictable, efficient, relatively speaking, aviation world that has just such a phenomenal safety record. What are we going to do with all of these new things that are coming into it? So we have 4 very experienced voices here to add into the discussion, and I will introduce them one at a time, starting with Mr. Jeffrey Richards, who is an air traffic controller and has been a member of the International Federation of Air Traffic Control Associations, where he's been contributing into the global developments and working with us at ICAO through the RPAS panel. So, please, Mr. Richards. Jeffrey.
Good morning. Thank you to our host for a wonderful venue and event. This place is truly fantastic. It exceeded my expectations. My name is Jeff Richards, representing the International Federation of Air Traffic Controllers Associations, or IFATCA. I sit on the ICAO RPAS panel, and I'm also an en route controller at Chicago Center in Illinois, among many other duties for the FAA that I do. Do I just click? Okay. The buzzwords this week seem to be segregation, having moved to a level of accommodation that we've heard about. Many states are experiencing now. We're moving towards a goal of complete integration, understanding it's quite a ways away yet. As a controller, we understand the industry must move towards integration. However, this must be done with a keen eye towards efficiency and safety. This, of course, means more policy needs to be developed regarding several aspects of RPAS operations as we move towards complete integration. Here we see the FAA's plan for RPAS integration into the FAA's National Airspace System. First, and I think most difficult, will be small UAS due to the number of entrants that we'll eventually see. These aircraft typically operate below 400 or 500 feet, and unless the operation is located near an airport or heliport, often don't require coordination. Additionally, their mission is typically very low level and of relative short duration. Obviously, policies surrounding things like see and avoid and the well-clear doctrine need to be established and embraced. However, small UAS, or any RPAS for that matter, operating in this airspace will need improved integration when their mission calls for a higher altitude or operations near an aerodrome. This brings us to predictability. It's one of the most important aspects for a controller working position with manned or unmanned aircraft. We simply need to know exactly what an aircraft is going to do should something like a lost command and control C2 link occur. Currently, without any guidance, unmanned aircraft will typically execute a lost link procedure that has been pre-coordinated with the service provider. Many times, unbelievably, this is not well known to the controller, but is often available, but not readily available. Unfortunately, this procedure is not the same from aircraft to aircraft. We see some contingencies where the aircraft will simply continue on its flight plan, certainly easy enough, if it is known. Alternatively, we have situations where the operator would like the aircraft to either return back to its departure airport or proceed to an alternate. In some instances, the airframe has been programmed to begin a climb once a lost link situation has been detected and verified. This is often in the vicinity of a ground station so that it can pick up and reestablish an air-to-ground link, thereby rectifying the lost link situation that possibly occurred from the satellite link. Obviously, ATC cannot accept this level of unpredictability in the system, and certainly not at the unmanned traffic levels that are predicted to increase. As we look at RPAS operations near aerodromes, I'm sure a level of uneasiness hits the other users of this airspace. If ATC needs to accommodate these operations, it is going to impact the other users. The United States has recently undergone a change in policy whereby a controller is not required to provide separation services to a small UAS, that's a small UAS, when the entire operation is contained wholly below 400 feet, even in controlled airspace. The concept here, of course, apologies. The concept here, of course, is the small UAS is seeing and avoiding manned aircraft and remaining well clear of these operations. It's quite obvious that this challenge presents itself once beyond visual line of sight operations are more prevalent. However, I am confident there will be policy in place prior to this integration. Even so, we are still seeing an uptick in unmanned aircraft sightings near airports. I'm sure you all have stories of your own. Here's an example of some of the sightings near LAX a while back. Another challenge on the horizon is unmanned traffic management, or UTM. We've heard about that a lot this week. Whatever UTM ultimately looks like, it needs to integrate seamlessly with air traffic control where they interact. Understanding, of course, this may require some conceptual changes when regulations are finally created to allow operations in this low-level airspace. As we know, this is primarily where package delivery is going to occur, and many airports are located in densely populated areas where people will order items for delivery. This is also where we are seeing many efforts by various entities underway to utilize this airspace. I would offer that some segments of low-level controlled airspace are often underutilized. Collectively, we need to identify this unused airspace, if available, and repurpose it when it can be done safely. However, there are segments of this controlled airspace that certainly warrant a very close eye on any policy changes aimed here, such as off the ends of runways. These changes could pose a threat to safety, controller workload, or impact to current airspace users. knowing, of course, any unmanned system that wishes to utilize airspace above 400 or 500 feet will need to observe current flight rules for the class of airspace in which they're operating. Nevertheless, unmanned operations still pose possible service disruptions in controlled airspace, in that, should a lost link occur, a predetermined maneuver would ensue. This could be as simple as remaining on the flight plan to an orbiting site, loitering for a specific amount of time, thereby allowing ATC time to prepare the airport for a lost link arrival, or conversely, a longer delay at the orbit site, allowing for a more robust attempt at reestablishing an acceptable link for airframe recovery. I would propose that these maneuvers need to be locally developed and published, thereby allowing ATC the flexibility to develop, in coordination with airspace users, the most efficient and safe execution for these types of maneuvers. In conclusion, consideration needs to be given for current airspace users, controller workload, and underutilized low-level controlled airspace segments, while the policy driving these changes is shaped. It is safe to say the policy needs to be driven by the safe, efficient use of controlled airspace, which allows increased capacity for any volume of airspace utilized for these unmanned aircraft activities. These changes cannot impact capacity in other segments of airspace and should be done in concert with the men and women providing services in these airspace. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jeff. So we got a little bit of the air traffic controller perspective. Next, we'll hear from the airline pilots. We have Mr. Pirasuth Sasunee. I'm sure, sorry, once again, I'm mangling names, who is a technical advisor with IFALPA, the International Federation of Airline Pilot Associations. So please, Pirasuth.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Pirasuth Sasunee. I'm representing IFALPA. I have my experience in airlines pilots. I'm now currently flying Airbus A380 for Thai Airways International. And I'm also a flight instructor of the A380 and also the flight test pilot for A380 for Thai Airways International as well. I am a member of the Aircraft Design and Operation Committee for IFALPA and responsible for the U.S. operation in this Asia-Pacific regions. And together with me today, Captain Henry Chan from Cathay Pacific, and who is a Vice Chairman of the Aircraft Design and Operation Committee, and Senior First Officer Jeremy Chia from Singapore Airlines, who are they are both sitting on the middle of the hall on the left, to my left. And thank you for your invitation, and we are really pleased to share our views on RPAS through our position paper. IFALPA stands for the International Federation of Airlines Pilots Association. 70 years ago, to maintain the highest level of safety in aviation, we want to make sure that pilots' voice of safety will take into account. As a result, IFALPA was founded in 1948. We are now representing more than 100,000 of airline pilots from over 100 member associations around the world. We are permanent observer of ICAO ANC and active in numerous ICAO panels, including RPAS panel. Our mission is to promote the highest level of aviation safety. Every time the new technology introduced to ATM systems, it has potential to increase risk, and we want to be involved to mitigate that risk. The introduction of RPAS should be done in the safe way as possible. Our members have expert backgrounds in safety, operation, including many aspects such as human factors. Position paper is simply what we think, why we think it, and what we think is the best way of dealing with specific issue. US operation or RPAS operation is a very hot issue amongst pilot communities because it affects air safety. And we have been talking about the position paper on US for a long time. Finally, after our annual conference in 2017 in Montreal, the latest version of our position paper on US have been published, which you can find on our website. This is what our position paper looks like, and this is our website. You can visit the ifalpa.org and then search the number 17 POS08 to the search area, and then you can find the whole paper of our position paper. It is critically important to ensure the safe integration of UAS into common civilian airspace. Accordingly, we made 19 position statements arranged under 3 aspects of UAS operation. The first one is general. We focus on all UAS general in all UAS operation in general. The second one is the UA as a collision threat to manned civil aviation, especially near aerodromes and lower airspace. This part focuses mainly on small UA or drones, which might be relevant to the drones enabled to on Thursday and Friday. There are increasing numbers of near misses with UA, particularly below 500 feet, and we are concerned that a collision between UA and manned aviation is very critical. The last aspect will be the UA as a participant integrated into common airspace. We divide into 2 subsections, the autonomous aircraft and the RPA. Right now, I would like to highlight IFALPA position that is relevant to our discussion on the impact of RPAS operations on other airspace users. We agree that all UAS should be integrated into common airspace, and accommodation should only be a temporary measure. Only one sky is available for all aviation users, and the principle of accommodation reduces the capacity of non-segregated airspace and should be limited. All efforts should be undertaken to transform accommodation into integration. We think that it is not acceptable to change the rules and regulations for manned aviation to accommodate UAS integration. Regulations for manned aviation has been established for a long period of time based on best practices, and these regulations should only be changed to enhance safety. We also think that every UAS should have at all times a responsible person in command who is suitably trained and qualified. All US operations should at all times be directly controlled by qualified person. All pilots in command of RPAS must have the same responsibility for safe operation as pilots in manned aircraft. Currently, we does not believe that autonomous unmanned aircraft can be integrated into common airspace. Fully autonomous UAS operations that do not allow any pilot intervention after takeoff should not be authorized. The remote pilot in command should have ability to respond changing flight conditions in real time. We do believe that UAS technology is not capable of replacing all necessary capabilities of a human pilot on board, especially during critical situations. Humans have the ability to make decisions in critical situations, to take over functions of failed systems, and unique ability to learn in real time. Without being on board, it is difficult to have enough situational awareness. We also think that all U.S. engaged into non-segregated public airspace should be certified and compliant with the provisions described here and after before being allowed to operate. The safe integration of the U.S. into civilian non-segregated airspace can only be achieved if U.S. operation must comply with existing rules and regulations applicable to other aircrafts in the same class of airspace. We also provide some further discussion on integration of U.S. into civilian airspace, including licensing and duty time, design and operation, air traffic control, security, dangerous goods, ground operations, SMS, and legal. And I would like to use this opportunity to focus on RPAS ATC integration. RPAS ATC integration must move from accommodation to integration in shared airspace. This integration should be developed with the highest level of safety of the airspace and other users. RPAS should behave like a manned aircraft and be subject to the rules of the air, same rules of the air that governs the other airspace users. Each UAS should have a designated pilot in command at all times. Pilot in command at all times who should ensure the UAS complies with rule of the air, ATC instructions, and clearance. Delays due to the data link communication transmission time are not acceptable. The response time of the US following ATC instructions should be comparable to that of a manned aircraft. And US should be equipped to provide collision avoidance at all times in all airspace. They should be equipped with transponders or other approved systems that they are compatible and cooperative with airborne collision systems installed in manned aviation. To wrap up and summarize, RPAS operation must move from accommodation to integration in shared airspace after full risk assessment has been completed. No new regulations for manned aircraft to accommodate RPAS. No additional procedures, no additional equipment for manned aviation. Every UAS should have a responsible person in command at all times, one remote pilot in command for every UAS, and no autonomous flight operation at the moment. Command and control link must be reliable. C2 link must be secure, and lost link must be extremely rare. RPAS must be equipped with a collision avoidance system that operates at all times, even during a lost link event. And finally, we do believe that US technology is not capable of replacing all necessary capability of a human pilot on board. Many serious accident incidents could have happened, but have been prevented because of human pilot on board. These human elements provide an add-on of safety and can serve as a final barriers to accidents. And that's the end, and thank you for your attention.
All right, thank you, Pirasuth. So now we've heard both air traffic controller and pilot perspectives. And I would suspect that we have various members in the audience who will have some different views on some of these points, and I'll be looking forward to getting some questions to pose to our panelists. But first, we have to continue on. We are next going to hear from Mr. S.L. Wong, who is here from the Airports Council International to speak about the views from be aerodrome operators of the world. As after all, this is not just an airspace question, this is also an aerodrome question. How do we fit all of this in? So please, Mr. Wong.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting ACI to this symposium. I'm speaking on behalf of the Association of Airports on the disruptive impact of RPAS on airport operations, and ACI's thinking in the mitigation of such impacts. I'll use the term drones interchangeably with RPAS since ACI has adopted the term drones in a number of official documents, including the newly published policy paper on drones. My presentation consists of 4 parts. The first is a quick review of the potential disruptive impact of drones on airport operations. The second part elaborates on ACI's position on how these impacts may be mitigated by collaboration amongst stakeholders, such as regulators, other state authorities, ANSP, drone operators, and airports. The third part presents the key ACI recommendation for its members on the mitigation of its impacts, in particular, the safety and security risks posed by the intrusion of drones in the airspace of the airport. The last part is a short conclusion summarizing the points above. As I said just now, drones or RPAS, when intruding the vicinity of airspace over the airport, poses safety and security risk to the operations of aircraft. Drones flying near the flight path or the taxi route of aircraft are obviously a safety hazard. If I may cite a witty remark recently given by an airfield operations manager here in Asia, drones are actually comparable to FOD, foreign objects debris, to aircraft in flight or taxiing. In addition to posing safety and security risks, RPAS could also have a negative impact on the capacity and efficiency of airports if not properly managed and integrated into existing conventional traffic. Advancements in drone design and manufacturing technology have driven down the cost of drones in the last few years, making them a very affordable gadget for recreation and useful tool for commercial purposes. They are now fitted with cameras, sensors, and GPS locators. In fact, they could be the next generation of flying robots if equipped with artificial intelligence and sophisticated mechanic undertaking tasks that are too costly or dangerous for human operators. Indeed, drones or RPAS have many important potential applications in air drone operation and maintenance, in even commercial transport in the long term. However, as for other technological breakthroughs, the advance of drones came with a number of unintended and unexpected consequences, the most significant of which is the risk of themselves colliding with conventional aircraft carrying passengers in flight. Based on the analysis of more than 800 safety reports in 2016, ACI together with IATA and IFALPA found not find out perhaps somewhat surprising and counterintuitive that there was little correlation between the distance between the airport or the altitude of the drone and the likelihood of a near collision. Therefore, the risk of collision with aircraft is at all altitudes and locations. The three associations published a joint statement in February 2016, primarily to raise amongst members of the public the safety risk posed by drones. Many of the advice given may seem common sense, but precisely, history repeatedly told us tragedies are often a consequence of a lapse of common sense. For example, the advisory bulletin shown on the right-hand side of the screen recommends the maintenance of line of sight with the drones and keeping them well away from aircraft and airports. Obviously, a practice that makes a lot of sense to most people. So far, the public and the media's attention has been focusing on small to medium-sized drones. This is understandable because they are most affordable and already being produced in mass scale for recreation and industrial use. But we should not forget RPAS can be as large as commercial aircraft for air transport. These large-scale RPAS or drones, like autonomous vehicles, have immense potential for commercial transport, in addition to applications in airport operations and maintenance. ACI is of the view that in the long term, RPAS operations should be integrated into controlled and uncontrolled airspace without negatively impacting the safety, efficiency, or capacity of the air traffic management system. Drones operating in and out of slot-coordinated or restricted airports should be subject to existing provisions controlling manned aircraft for access to that airport. In short, RPAS should be treated like manned aircraft from the perspective of air transport when the time comes for them to be integrated into the existing commercial operations. They should be allocated slots and charges should be levied for the use of aerodrome facilities, such as the runway and parking stands. Increasingly, drones are suspected being used by criminals for attacks or scouting to prepare attacks. A recent daring jailbreak in France is believed to have been planned with the help of a drone. The fugitive ran away in a hijacked helicopter, but a drone is believed to have been used to survey the prison compound for planning the escape. This naturally raises legitimate concerns for airport security. For the moment, aircraft landing or taking off at high speeds are considered most vulnerable to drone attacks. Drones can be used for attacks on aircraft simply with its own mass. Otherwise, they can be used or they can be attached with explosives or chemical, biological, and radioactive agents to make them more destructive and hazardous. Now I'm coming to the second part of my presentation. ACI recently produced a policy paper elaborating on the association's position on the mitigation of impacts of RPAS on airport operations in relation to other stakeholders, such as regulators, ANSP, and RPAS operators. It also provides a number of recommendations for its airport members to mitigate these impacts. In general, ACI thinks that drones are a promising technological advancements that should be embraced and therefore facilitated. Of course, provided that they do not have a negative impact to safety, security, efficiency, or capacity of airport operations. As the amount of drones traffic is expected to increase in the years to come, they should be integrated and accommodated into the air navigation system without increasing net operating costs for airport operators, ANSP, or other aviation system users. Airport operators should, where applicable, be able to recover any cost associated with accommodating drone operations at the airport. Besides, drones operating in and out of slot-coordinated or restricted airports should be subject to existing provisions controlling manned aircraft for access to the airport. Of course, we have to remember drones are very popular recreational purposes these days, and sometimes they fly near airports. They should only be allowed to operate at or in the vicinity of airdrome with the authorization of the airdrome operator and the ANSP. As for the safety regulation of RPAS operations, ACI is of the view that RPAS should be regulated to the equivalent level of manned aircraft. For example, commercial operators of large drones should be required to obtain air operator's certificate, like traditional airlines, and the aircraft subject to the same maintenance standards. It also follows that the old wisdom of risk-based approach to safety regulation should also be applied to drones. Similarly, other requirements such as those related to communications, transponders, anti-collision lights should be imposed. There will very probably be occasions when drones posing clear security and safety risks to an airport need to be neutralized, that is, to be taken down. States should appoint an enforcement agency empowered to carry out such tasks. So much for regulations. We must not, of course, forget ANSPs, who are another key partner for ensuring safe operation of drones. It only seems common sense that airports and ANSP should work closely together to facilitate drone operations, as in other areas of airport operations. As for drone operators, ACI recommends a number of safety requirements as mentioned a moment ago, such as having air operator certificates. What I didn't mention was the requirements for the same aircraft engine noise and emission standards, as defined in Annex 16 today. Not to forget, and equally important, is the requirement to take out insurance in case of any mishaps. Before I move on, I'd like to raise a point for discussion. Should RPAS be equipped with the capability to decipher existing visual aids like artificial airfield signs and markings? Or should visual aids be adapted in the future so that they can be read by both human pilots and cameras or sensors fitted to RPAS? Here comes the final part of my presentation on ACI's recommendation for its member airports and a brief conclusion. ACI, as the International Association of Airports, has a number of recommendations for its members to mitigate the risk associated with drones operations, in particular safety risks. Airports should have their staff made aware or trained on requirements for drone operations at or near the airport. The training, for example, should include national regulations on drone operations in and around airports, types of drones authorized to operate at or in the vicinity of the airport, tracking of drones, coordination with ATC, and risk assessment for methodologies for drones operations. In conclusion, drones or RPAS is a promising technological advancement that has many potential applications in airport operations, maintenance, and even commercial transport. It's a technology that should be embraced and facilitated. However, its potential impact on aerodrome safety, aviation security, airport capacity, and efficiency should be carefully and collaboratively managed by all the stakeholders. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right, so now we've added in the perspective of the airports and different aspects that need to be addressed there, particularly how this will interact with the operation on the ground at the airport and in close proximity. We have one more perspective to present, and that'll be from the International Air Transport Association, representing the airlines. We have Mr. Daniel Vaca. Dan, if you would, please.
Good morning, everyone. What Leslie didn't say is that we've known each other over 20 years, which is something that we've been joking about all morning long. IATA appreciates the opportunity to be able to appear before this symposia and to contribute to the dialogue, which is quite honestly just growing even faster, at a faster rate. And if you don't mind, and if the translator needs a signal that I slow down, please do so. This hit or that it? Wait, this is that. Okay. As my colleague Hong Hai said on Monday, safety is IATA's primary mandate. It's critical to ensure that the relevant risks associated with the models and proper safety management systems are all in place for RPAS operations. I think that has been stated numerous times throughout the week. While the development around UAS technologies may provide opportunities, the irresponsible use in the close vicinity of airports and around manned aircraft may pose a risk to civil aviation. It could also be said that the risk associated with small UAS used by people unfamiliar with or having little awareness of civil aviation and its regulations that have been discussed all week only increase the need to develop the standards and recommended practices as we move forward. But these have all been discussed numerous times throughout the week. Okay. So what I'm going to do is sort of step through this without adding additional slides at the risk of being removed by the Secretariat. RPAS operations in general, provide access to airspace should remain available to all aircraft. That each UAS is capable of meeting the pertinent conditions, regulations, processes, and equipage defined for that airspace. It seems sort of second nature. New types of operations may need additional or alternative considerations, conditions, regulations, processes, and operating procedures, with the objective to add only the minimum necessary to achieve safe operations. In other words, do not over-regulate, and I think most people here can appreciate that. An RPA needs to have the functional capability to meet the established normal and contingency operational procedures for the class of airspace they'll operate in. I think that's also been said. Operations in general continuing cannot impede or impair other airspace users, service providers, air traffic management entities, aerodromes, etc., or the safety of the third parties on the ground or their property. That's also been discussed. An RPA must operate in accordance with the rules of the air. I think the Secretary General covered that on Monday. An operator must meet the applicable certification approval requirements. And when utilized, a remote pilot must be competent, licensed, and capable to discharge the responsibility for safe flight. Again, already stated. These are not new. The comments that I've sort of going through are just things that we all, as an organization and as a body, should be adhering to or at least proposing. But we also look at the other aspect of this, anti-UAS measures. Although not touched entirely, potentially the next segment will do so. But IATA is working closely with governments and aviation agencies. We're deploying anti-UAS measures to ensure that these measures are implemented following an appropriate safety assessment in order to support continuous monitoring of UAS activities, effective countermeasures that can be activated in time to prevent UAS from entering airspace where there's areas of interest, including safety-sensitive areas, such as final approaches, missed approach paths, departure paths. Implementation within the airspace where there are substantiated safety and security risks caused by UAS activities, these risks should be able to appropriately justify associated infrastructure and operational costs for the anti-UAS measures. These measures range from radio frequency signal analyzers, which monitor, detect and analyze all relevant radio frequencies and supporting techniques, such as frequency hopping, which I understand are used to control the UAS. This is an area I am not an expert in. We have engineers within IATA who will speak to this at length, but we did sort of touch on frequencies throughout this week. Uncooperative radar, optical, VDO, thermal tracking, and acoustic technologies for detection of UAS flying autonomously that may not have a simultaneous radio control link. RF signal jamming, selective jamming of the RF signal being used to control the UAS, which touches on geofencing, I believe. Wireless local area network signal interruption. Interruption of the WLAN used by some UAS systems or broadcasting, a set of radio communications, computer commands to take control of the UAS are possible. Hacking of a UAS is something that we're thinking about. UAS, jumping back a little bit, but use of UAS interceptors, UAS nets, train predatory birds. There's a number of things that have been discussed for anti-measures. Sort of got off here. How to go back? Let's see. There it is. It is essential that the aforementioned measures do not create unintended safety hazards and unmitigated risks to other aircraft and aviation infrastructures. I think that's the main goal here. Whatever we are devising, whatever we're preparing, whatever we're developing, the intent is do no harm. Technologies that disrupt the command and control link between the UAS and operator must have mitigation procedures in place. UAS pre-programmed command functionality is not always guaranteed. Interfering with radio frequencies being used by aircraft, air traffic management systems, and other legally authorized applications must be avoided. GPS, GNSS jammers, and spoofing should not be used in anti-UAS measures. Technologies for protecting UAS against GPS, GNSS jamming, and spoofing are being tested, from what we understand, and expected to be soon commercially available. Anti-UAS radar-based systems used for ATM, such as primary surveillance radars for approach control and airport surface movement, need to be appropriately coordinated and empirically validated such that there will be no adverse impact to ATM. UAS traffic management regarding operations will provide new opportunities for traffic management, separation standards, and airspace planning. I think that is something that's key. As the technology continues to advance, we'll actually be able to use it in existing or current day ATM management. Provides new opportunities. We envision that the elements of UTM could work, transition to and help advance air traffic management. Future development of UAS and UTM systems could also help increase the level of safety in the airspace. In particular, automation and technological advances in the UAS industry could potentially be transferable. One critical factor to support advancements in UAS and UTM is the ease with which technical and performance data can be attained. In the future, do we move towards, as we've sort of discussed on the periphery, swim-based capabilities? We realize it's relatively cheap and quick to operate UAS in some instances compared with manned aviation, and the regulatory authorities and relevant partners in the aviation value chain have quicker access to more operational data to help improve concepts and justify operations. Operations in proximity to manned aircraft is a concern. At present, these missions may either be conducted as VLOS or BVLOS, are subject to more stringent risk thresholds to comply with the higher target levels of safety associated with manned aircraft. Primary means of achieving required risk level is likely through a combination of robust, redundant, and low latency command and control links. The precise lateral, vertical positioning and onboard traffic avoidance systems should be considered as a last resort. We don't necessarily want to rely on that. Consideration based on real-time manned aircraft arrival, departure, corridors, and use will be essential. To support this, and mentioned by a fellow panel member from ACI, IATA has done a study. Some of this may surprise you. The analysis of RPAS events that we have within a database showed out of 93% of, or 448 of the reports indicated the phase of flight, and as expected, the majority of incidents were reported during approach, descent, takeoff, climb. Of the data, the average distance from the airport, or 29% of 139 reports, indicated that the time of occurrence, the global average was about 6 nautical miles. 15 additional reports indicated UAS encounters on short funnel, and not all reports contained the distance of the UAS from the airport. The average separation from the UAS was not necessarily described by the reporter, but this had a lot to do with size versus weight, which is a consideration. IATA data indicates TCAS events were reported in 10 of the incidents. In 4 out of the 10 cases, the TA was followed by an RA. Out of the 10 events, 9 events did not report the size of the RPAS. And regarding altitude, out of the 10, 50%, the report stated the altitude of the UAS, out of which 3 UAS incidents were below 7,000 feet, not the 400. Was ATC aware? Out of the 480 reports, from what we understand, stated that ATC was aware of the UAS or was informed by the flight crew, which is a good thing. But the majority of occurrences, the UAS did not paint on the ATC radar. Disconnect. Given the size and variability in shapes, it will be difficult for ATC to recognize small UAS without the benefit of transponders, as was mentioned. Continuing on, out of the 480 reports, some aircraft were diverted due to UAS event, closure of airports. Diversions often followed a period of holding, or if the flight crews were able to visually acquire the UAS with sufficient distance, aircraft were allowed to maneuver to the airport. In order to maneuver the UAS was an average distance of more than 2 nautical miles horizontally and 350 feet vertically. There was an incident that we became aware of within the ATM Ops panel discussions, which I participated in, where the airport was closed for about 30 minutes. Quite an impact. Out of the report types, 3 different categories: collision, near collision, or encounter. Collision, obviously apparent. Near collision, when the UAS and aircraft was less than 3 nautical miles, 1,000 feet. And encounter, when the separation between the UAS and aircraft was greater than 3 nautical miles or 1,000 feet. Of these, there's different types. And I'll get back to the final on the collision. Types and risks. We've all been discussing these things, and actually the presentation provided by SF Express, I believe it was, showed some of this, along with UPS, if Captain Mills is still here. Package delivery. Payload will carry vehicles that fly between warehouses or pickup points and delivery locations. Flights that operate with varying levels of autonomy. The operator may have a human pilot maneuvering multiple operations at once, but with limited capability to manually control the vehicle. And the operator may have a human on the ground with functionally limited roles. But the risk is there. The number of operations may overwhelm the system, creating a hazard to operators in and around these areas. Another type of operation, emergency response. Haven't really heard that this week. But of these, vehicles would require priority handling and authorization in conjunction with police, firefighting, and other operations critical to life. Vehicles may be deployed by a pilot at the scene or an event and operate similarly to a VLOS mission. Autonomously launch from a storage and recharge depot. The UAS may need broader and faster access to controlled airspace that wouldn't otherwise be permitted. And flights may need to operate at altitudes above 400 feet. Risk. Possibility exists that the operations may require all other traffic to deviate from the normal patterns, resulting in increased complexities for the ATM system and for the cockpit. Another type of risk, or another type of operation, I should say, and we sort of touched on this in the last couple of days, urban air mobility, air taxis. Understand that is rapidly approaching. The large VTOL vehicles that can carry maybe 1 to 4 passengers over distances up to 100 nautical miles. Vehicles will take off and land at designated locations, but may use helipads, plane fields, other open spaces. Vehicles may have an onboard safety pilot during the initial deployment phases, as was indicated yesterday. Vehicles should be equipped to detect and avoid sensors. But the risk, given the expectation that these vehicles will plan to operate in and around airports, there must be an assessment done to mitigate any possible conflicts. Air traffic control, something quite familiar with. Assuming that the current vision of establishing an autonomous traffic management system, UAS operations in controlled airspace is valid, the deployment of procedures, routes, and separation rules to avoid conflict with manned traffic is a must. In the event of failures of the communication link, a UTM service provider will need to ensure these monitoring UAS flights are aware, not just of the impending unresolved conflict, but also of any follow-up conflicts that might emerge based on this first set of control instructions. Design and development of decision support tools must provide controllers with suggested best courses of action. Here are the risks. Relationship between ATC and UTM will need to be clearly defined. I think that's still in the development. As the concept develops, unclear airspace boundaries and operating procedures will increase the potential for collision or risk. Ultimately, key findings. Data suggests that UAS reports are underrepresented. We're working on that, which includes that there were more, which would basically indicate that there were far more UAS incidents during 2012 and 2016 than what was reported. IATA has compiled data indicating that there were 472 UAS reports. Of those, there was a total of 3 collisions, something to be concerned about. The relationship between ATC and UTM will need to be clearly defined, Airspace equipment and tools will all play a significant role in assisting the personnel that will manage these two similar yet different systems. And the costs associated with introduction of UAS into a terminal area must not adversely affect the primary objective of ensuring a safe and efficient system. Thank you.
All right, very well. Trying to make sure that I don't lose my microphone again today like I did yesterday. So trying to make sure that we have the microphones already in hand. Hopefully this will be more efficient. So we've heard from each of the speakers in a very traditional way what the issues are that they see about having new unmanned aircraft joining into our aviation world. And what I have found to be very consistent between each of the speakers is how much they really do want the unmanned aircraft to be operating like a manned aircraft, which of course is not necessarily the way the unmanned aviation industry wants to be operating. So first I just want to put out, and perhaps you can comment on this, to what extent are you willing to reach out and have very new types of operations that are going on in proximity, but not necessarily part of the very clearly structured traditional aviation system? So, Pirasuth, do you want to start?
You want me to start, huh? If they want to operate in the segment where we are controlling, then they're going to need to be able to operate as if they're a manned aircraft. However, there are a lot of airspace that is underutilized, and they can have that airspace and run their operations in that airspace. It's just when you want to get close to an airport at 100 feet, you know, treetop level or whatever, or even slightly higher, that it's going to pose an impact to operations. So if it is deemed safe that 3 miles from the airport at 200 feet, this airspace is not utilized whatsoever, and it's safe that they can, that their 200 feet and below is effectively contained, absolutely no problem with that, and we would encourage it. Rather have the operations there than close to the airport.
Well, actually, I'll add on to this a little bit and just say, particularly with aerodrome operations, we now are starting to see where small unmanned aircraft are being used by the aerodrome operators themselves to improve aspects at the airport, such as bird control or checking for falling object debris that may be out near the runway. So airports using the drones themselves within the operation.
Yes. Okay. There's no doubt that drones or ALPAs will have a lot of application in airport operations in the future. And this is going to be a paradigm shift. Very much like when automobile was introduced in the early 20th century, when people were still using horse carriages. So what would be most interesting is the transitional period when people were still using horse carriages and automobile at the same time. Okay. In the long term, I think most people are pretty sure that there will only be ALPAs and drones, or 99% of the traffic will be drones or ALPAs. But this requires a paradigm shift in the mentality of everybody, regulators, operators, and the infrastructure providers.
Agreed. Agreed wholeheartedly. I think we're all here in this room understanding that the industry is growing at a rate that the airlines in particular are not pushing back. I think we're all just trying to ensure that we are at the table, we're able to provide risk of concerns as we've all sort of been detailing, and to ensure that there is a level of safety, there's a level of standards that we can all understand. Predictability is important, but in and around airports, as indicated on the reports that we have, for airlines' perspective, that's the risk. That clearly is the risk, and we're not oblivious to the fact that industry, especially in the package delivery in that environment, in an urban environment, as was noted by Boeing's comments, that is where there's going to be a large number of UAVs, UAS, operating in and around, and the airlines are just looking to ensure that that corridor or cone that we operate in is going to be safe.
Okay, actually, we, as the IFALPA Allies pilot, we welcome the new technology and we recognize the potential benefit of it. But let me share you this idea. When you get something, you might also lose something else. You may reduce the number of pilots on board. You can save operation budget. But on the other hand, you can lose the add-on of safety. Human pilot in the cockpit is has a very unique capability of making decisions at real time, and we can hear some strange noise, we can smell something wrong, and we can detect abnormal functions maybe earlier than the computers can do. So again, we welcome the new technology, but we believe that the new technology cannot replace our capability of having a pilot on board. We are happy to share the airspace, but it is very important to ensure the safe integration of the RPAS operation.
All right, I know that we're actually out of time, but I'm going to put forward one more question just because it is a consistent theme amongst most of the questions that have been submitted. And that is about training of people, particularly on the recreational side, that are the ones using most of the small drones that are interfering with civil aviation. So generally speaking, it's not viewed as being the professional, commercial type of operations, it's recreational. So what can be done to try and get the recreational users to understand the aviation aspects of what they're doing and the risks to traditional civil aviation? Pirasuth, would you like to start?
Yes, we said in the paper that at least the pilot who can control all UAS should have the competency to see and avoid. For example, to know at least the airspace, to know the environment, and at least rule of the air to share the same airspace as well. So states should organize or try to make a standard to get a standard for getting the license, but maybe not very complex as an airline pilot, but just enough for the recreation purpose.
Recreational drones probably posing most risk to airports or at the moment. But this can only be resolved with education and promotional campaigns amongst the public.
No, just
Okay. The recreational drones are very popular these days, and the risk posed to flight operations near the airport can only be resolved with educational campaigns. And I think the government and together with the associations should conduct more promotional campaigns to educate the public.
So you tried to get me to speak earlier, Leslie. I will say this. Obviously, this is something that ICAO and the CAAs will have to consider individually as to what they allow, what they don't allow. But as someone who fails miserably at any type of gaming activity, if I have to utilize different buttons and things like that, I can't imagine what type of training you would actually have to instill. But I realize there's something, as you say, education is probably going to be the predominant one. For those that can actually move things around and actually keep track of something as small as a 5-kilogram UAS, I'm amazed at their abilities. But in general, this is something that the CAAs and ICAO, as you enter into the further discussions on UAS, specifically small, that's hopefully something the best practices will be designed, and you can go forward from that.
I think the manufacturers include instructions and warnings about what kind of training, what kind of regulations are in place. I know they do in the United States. And then the FAA also runs outreach and has advertisements and et cetera for educating the flying public. And I think it's just going to take time as more of these enter into the marketplace for that to take hold.
all right, very well. So we'll be looking actually for CAAs, the associations, and even ICAO to be putting out more information to help educate the general population when they are purchasing drones for recreational use. And that is in addition to all the work that has to be done in terms of the regulatory aspects. Well, with that, I will say thank you all to the panelists. Very good of you to all be here first thing in the morning. And we'll have a coffee break. Would everyone please be back at 11 o'clock to restart? And in the meantime, thank you to the panelists.